believe in the soul. But does the soul believe in you? Or to put it another way, if you were to die right now, what would remain? A chemical imprint in the brain, or something unseen yet never gone? In today's video, you'll witness a fictional debate, but one that holds some of the deepest truths about being human. Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, who believed everything stemmed from instinct and the unconscious, versus Jung, the man who dared to say that there is a soul beyond the mind. Halfway through the video, there will be a surreal dream sequence where both men encounter something inexplicable, and that may be the part you'll never forget. You're watching Heaven's Thread, where we retell conversations that never happened, but might have been real in some deeper layer of consciousness. If, by the end of this video, you feel this was a journey worth reflecting on, leave the letter Q in the comments, so I know you want to keep exploring these mysteries. And if you'd like me to improve the content, don't hesitate. Just leave the letter E. I'm always listening. It was an autumn night. Zurich lay still, shrouded in cold mist and an eerie silence. Carl Jung sat alone in a small wooden cottage by the lake. In front of him, a crackling fireplace, a glass of red wine, an old notebook, and an empty chair. He was waiting. A few minutes later, the door opened. Sigmund Freud stepped in long coat, worn flat cap, cane in hand. No words were spoken, only glances exchanged. The gaze of two men who were once friends, once mentor and student, now two souls standing at opposite ends of the world. Jung poured the wine. Freud sat down, keeping his coat on. He looked around the warm wooden room as if he had stepped into another world, a world he didn't believe in. Jung gave a faint smile and said, slowly, "Sigmund, you once told me there is nothing after death. But last night, I dreamed of your father. He stood by the lake, and he said, you were wrong." The air in the room froze. Freud frowned, gripping his cane tighter. But he didn't respond with anger. He simply asked, "So, you believe you can speak with the dead?" "Carl?" Jung nodded, still gentle, as if whispering to the fire. "I don't speak, I listen." Freud fell silent, and in that moment, both men, one who believed in instinct, one who believed in the soul, sat across from each other like two sides of a question never answered. What are you feeling right now? Do you lean toward Freud with cold reason? Or do you quietly lean toward Jung with the belief that something exists beyond the body? Let that thought settle, because in the next part, everything will begin to crack. Want to hear more? Just type next below. Freud leaned back, his sharp eyes carved deep beneath thick brows. He didn't look at Jung. Instead, he stared directly into the fireplace. The flames flickered, almost mocking. His voice broke the silence. Slow, precise, and unyielding. "Carl, I didn't come here to listen to fantasy. I came because you were once the only man brave enough to ask the right question. But now you say you speak to the dead. What about reason? What about evidence? What about analysis, the only thing that has ever pulled humanity out of the darkness of superstition?" Jung didn't answer right away. He only smiled a small, gentle smile, like an invitation to step beyond the safety of the known. Freud shook his head. He placed the wineglass firmly on the wooden table and said, with finality, The human mind is a complex machine. Every dream, every hallucination, it's all the product of repressed drives. The soul, Carl, is just a beautiful word to hide our fear. Fear of death, fear of meaninglessness, and the fear that we are no more than beasts. In that moment, a cold draft slipped through the wooden door frame. The fire in the hearth wavered. Jung looked up, but he didn't refute. He didn't rush to argue, because he understood. Freud wasn't afraid of the soul. He was afraid that if the soul was real, then his life's work had denied the most sacred part of being human. Do you see yourself in Freud? When you try to use logic to silence feelings you can't explain? Or are you starting to listen, not with your ears, but with the intuition deep in your heart? Let that settle. Because in the next part, Jung will share a dream no one can analyze. Only remember. Carl Jung sat silently for a long moment. He didn't respond to Freud with arguments. He answered with a story. He spoke of a young patient, a Swiss girl who had never left the countryside. She didn't know about Egypt. She didn't read. She had no access to higher education. And yet, in a deep dream, she described a strange symbol, a bird with a human head, carrying a soul away from a dead body. Jung explained. When he showed the drawing to an Egyptologist, the scholar was stunned. It was the Ba, an ancient Egyptian symbol of the soul. There was no way the girl could have known. Jung looked up at Freud. His gaze wasn't persuasive. It was simply the look of a man who had seen something and was now telling the tale. Sigmund, we believe the mind is programmed by memory. But what about the memories that don't belong to the individual, that aren't stored in the brain, that don't come from parents but from the soul itself? Jung paused. He placed a hand lightly on his chest. I've called it the collective unconscious. But maybe that was just science's way of avoiding the word soul. Freud smirked, but in his eyes was the flicker of confusion. He had no answer, and no way to fully dismiss it. Have you ever dreamed of a place you've never been, or met someone you've never known, but who somehow felt deeply familiar? Maybe your soul has lived another life, in another time, and that memory is still here, waiting for you to remember. Hold on to that feeling, because in the next part, Freud and Jung will enter the same dream, a dream where every boundary between reason and the soul begins to dissolve. Night fell. The wooden cottage sank into silence. Outside, the lake lay still like a mirror reflecting what the eye could never see. Freud fell asleep early, eyes closed, his hand resting lightly on an old leather-bound notebook. Jung stayed up longer, quietly lighting a small candle by the window. No more words were exchanged, only the sound of wind, the soft creak of timber. And then the dream arrived. In the dream, they found themselves in a long corridor, pure white, no doors, only a child, around 6 years old, standing there with its back turned to them. The child trembled, as if lost. In its hands an old wooden box. It turned around, but had no face, only a soft blur of light, like moonlight behind clouds. Jung walked toward the child. Freud stood still. Jung reached out his hand. The child opened the box. Inside, there was nothing, only light. A warm, glowing light so powerful it made Jung weep in the dream. And then everything dissolved. The room vanished. The corridor vanished. The child vanished. Only a voice remained, not from outside, but from within both of them. This is where memory begins. Not the memory of the brain, but the memory of the soul. Freud woke first. Cold sweat. His hand trembled, a rare thing for a man who mastered self-control. He looked at Jung and whispered, "I saw it. I don't understand." But I saw. Jung said nothing. He just looked into the eyes of his old friend, not as an analyst, but as a soul. Finally affirmed it wasn't alone. Have you ever had a dream you couldn't explain? But when you woke, you knew it was real. Not because of logic, but because the feeling could never be faked. Dreams may be a door, and sometimes two souls step through the same door together. The next part will be the moment Freud confronts the deepest part of himself. Not Jung, not the dream, but his father, long gone. The next morning, fog blanketed the sky. The first rays of sunlight weren't strong enough to pierce the thick mist surrounding the wooden cottage. Freud sat alone on the back porch. In his hand was a cigar long since gone out. Yet he hadn't lit it. Jung didn't come out. He left Freud to himself. Because he knew the deepest conversations are often the silent ones we have within. Freud stared out at the lake and whispered, as if speaking only to himself, "I once dreamed of my father, just after he passed. In the dream, he stood beside me in my study, and he said nothing. He only looked at me with eyes full of disappointment." Freud paused. His voice wavered, as if something long suppressed had surfaced. I woke up drenched in sweat and told myself it was only a chemical reaction, a neural impulse, a triggered memory. But what if I was wrong? It was the first time. Freud didn't speak as an analyst. He spoke as a son who never cried when his father died. He simply wrote the dream down and buried it beneath the belief that everything can be explained. Jung stepped outside. He said nothing. He simply placed a hand on Freud's shoulder, gently, then said, "You don't have to believe in the soul, Sigmund, but maybe you can start by letting the pain exist." Freud didn't reply, but a single tear rolled down his cheek, not from his eyes, but as if from somewhere far deeper, a place he had long denied. Are you carrying a sorrow that you've tried to analyze, explain, and name, but it won't go away, because it doesn't need to be solved. It only needs to be acknowledged. Maybe that is where your soul is waiting for you to return. The next part will be the moment Jung no longer tries to prove anything. He simply believes in the silent, steady presence of something more sacred than knowledge. That afternoon, the air was still cold. Freud had grown quieter. Jung remained the same, calm, a little distant, as if he were listening to something that made no sound. He poured hot tea and handed it to Freud, then sat quietly by the fire. No books, no notebooks, just listening and remembering. Jung spoke. When I was young, I wanted to understand everything. I thought if I was smart enough, analytical enough, curious enough, I would reach the final essence of the human being. He smiled softly, but then I realized the soul doesn't come to be understood. It comes to be lived with. Jung shared about the moments he sat beside patients near death. Some saw light, some saw loved ones, and some saw nothing at all. But in every pair of eyes before they closed, there was one thing in common: acceptance. He turned to Freud and said, "I don't know for sure what awaits us after death, but I do know one thing. Fighting it with logic only makes us more afraid." He placed a hand on his chest, gently, as if holding a wisp of smoke. "Perhaps the soul doesn't need to be proven, only acknowledged." Freud looked up. He didn't argue anymore. He simply exhaled, a breath not of exhaustion, but of release. Have you ever tried to understand something for so long that you forgot how to feel it? Sometimes, letting go of needing to understand is how we begin to truly feel. Maybe your soul isn't asking for answers. It's just asking you to stay with it. The next part will be the moment these two men say goodbye. No need for right or wrong. No need for victory or defeat. Only silence and the truths that were never spoken aloud. Early the next morning, the sky was thick with gray. The last leaves of the season rustled gently in the wind, as if whispering something humanity could no longer hear. Freud packed his belongings in silence. No rushing, no urgency, only the quiet preparation to leave something behind, something he himself couldn't yet name. Jung stood on the porch, hands in the pockets of a thick wool coat. He said nothing, didn't ask him to stay, didn't try to hold him back. Freud stepped outside. The two men stood face to face. No handshake, no goodbye. Just a look, the look of two souls who once walked together, once clashed, once wounded each other with their beliefs. But now, in this moment, silently acknowledged. You don't have to fully understand someone to have truly journeyed with them. Freud turned his gaze toward the narrow path that led into town, a path lost in fog, with no clear end in sight. Then he spoke softly, but clearly, "I still don't believe in the soul, Carl. But last night, I dreamed, and I'm no longer sure that I'm right." Jung gave a slight nod, not agreement, but an acknowledgement that uncertainty is part of the journey. Freud turned away, walked slowly. Each step on the gravel felt like a memory leaving his mind. No more theories, no more frameworks, only a feeling. Have you ever parted ways with someone, not through final words, but through a silence that lingered? Because some goodbyes don't need to be spoken. Sometimes having been there for each other is enough. The next part won't be a debate. It will be a final question for you, the one listening. What remains after all the dialogue, the conflict, and the fear? Freud had gone. The narrow path outside the house no longer held footprints. Only the white fog remained, and Carl Jung, standing alone in silence. He turned back inside. On the table, the tea was cold. The fire in the hearth had faded, but the warmth from the night before still lingered somewhere in the room. Jung opened his journal. He wrote a single line. Not everything sacred needs to be proven. Some things only need to be felt. Then he set down the pen, lifted his eyes toward the window. A dim light filtered through the morning fog, like a quiet greeting from the other side of the veil. Maybe Freud was right, that everything is just chemistry, neurology, and memory. Maybe Jung was right, that there's an ancient soul living inside each of us, waiting to be remembered. But more important than either is you listening to these words. What do you believe? Have you ever felt like someone was watching over you, Had a dream that left you waking with tears you couldn't explain, or sensed, without reason, that you've lived another life before. Maybe you're not searching for answers. Maybe you're searching for a memory of something you've always known. And if the soul truly exists, then perhaps in this very moment, as you quietly listen to the end, your soul is gently nodding and saying, "I'm still here, and I still remember." You've just heard a story from Heaven's Thread, where conversations that were never recorded are retold through the soul. If you still feel something stirring inside you, leave the letter Q in the comments, so I know you wish to continue this journey. If something didn't sit quite right, leave an E. I'll listen, and I'll make it better. And if your heart was truly moved, share this with someone you trust, someone you believe is searching for their soul. 2.